Today our theme, Stop Trying, Start Trusting. And we're going to cover the whole chapter of Exodus 14. It's a long reading. So put your patience pants on. We're going to be reading a long one. At least I won't make you stand during it at church at least.
Pastor. Steve? Yeah, was here. He thought we had such a long reading that Sunday. And I think he let us sit down, but it really wasn't that long. We're tougher than that.
Gospel readings, if it's a long one, I'll have you sit. But there's not too many of them. But this is Exodus 14. All right? So to kind of lead up to the story of Exodus 14, this is the crossing at the sea. In chapters 7, 8, 9, and 10, we've got all the plagues that happened in Egypt, right? God is battling with the gods of Egypt. You know, all the plagues, they're not just random. Every one of them, God is basically challenging the gods of Egypt and defeating them. And Pharaoh's heart's getting harder and harder till finally the last plague is the plague of the firstborn and the Passover. The story kind of takes a pause then, right? After describing the plague of the firstborn, there's a couple chapters there, chapters 12 and 13, that begin to describe, okay, now here's how you're going to celebrate the meal, right? Passover meal is going to be for you an annual event, and here's how you are to celebrate it, and here's why you celebrate it. Well, that's where we pick back up then. In end of chapter 13 into 14 is the crossing of the Red Sea. So I actually want to start at chapter 13, verse 17. Just kind of set the stage for leading into the story itself. Are you there? Yep. Chapter 13, verse 17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country. That will be today the Gaza Strip. Okay? God does not lead them through the Gaza Strip, though that was the shorter way. God said if they faced war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. And the Israelites went up out of Egypt armed for battle. Well, they're leaving very quickly with nothing to take, and they're refugees. So when it says they're armed for battle, not much, yeah. And they're really not going to be fighting this battle themselves, right?
Maybe mentally.
Maybe mentally, yeah. So at verse 19, interesting. I think I did an All Saints service on this one time. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath. He said, God will surely come to our aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. So Joseph didn't want his remains to be left in Egypt. He wanted to be buried with his family in the cave of Mamre, where Abraham had a burial plot.
Who was this?
Joseph. Joseph, the youngest. Yeah. Joseph, the coat of many colors. So the youngest son of, second youngest son of Jacob, and he's the one that became the rescuer when the famine came into Egypt. Yeah. So that's the Joseph. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. So God is visually leading his people. Are you going to doubt if you see a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud? Probably not. You're going to have this visual presence that God is there.
So by day, could they see the fire?
It seems like it was the cloud.
It said a pillar of cloud by day.
Yeah, cloud by day, fire by night.
Yeah, so by day,
it was a cloud.
In the daytime,
cloud.
If they turned around, could they see the fire?
It was leading them.
It was in front of them, they were following.
Well, the cloud was, but...
And the fire.
It was a cloud during the day and it was fire at night.
So the fire went away during the day.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the fire is going to show up here in chapter 14. By day. That's going to be the one that is going to keep the Egyptians.
You knew it was coming by day.
You did. Okay, now we're going to get to chapter 14. So that just sets the stage, right? They've left Egypt. God is leading them. That's the point. God is leading them on this journey. Verse 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp at Pi Hahiroth between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite of Baal Zephon." These are reference places that we probably don't know 100% sure where they're at today, but maybe there's some archaeology that has been discovering them. But they're setting, they got a desert behind them, and they've got, right, the sea in front of them. Now, where exactly in this Red Sea are they located? We don't fully know that for sure. So don't ask me where those places are. So Pharaoh will think, "The Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all of his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." So the Israelites did this. So basically, if you want to say, what God is doing is he's telling the Israelites, kind of act like wandering fools, right? And kind of give Pharaoh the impression that you have no clue of how to defend a camp. Because when you camp at the edge of a sea, what do you not leave yourself? Escape. No place to escape or retreat.
You're locked in.
You're locked in. Right. So militarily, this is a foolish plan. And God says, yeah, do it that way because I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh has set himself so much against me and become such my enemy, I will show all of his people that I really am the Lord. And that Pharaoh is nothing. Because Pharaoh considered himself to be a god. Yeah.
A God.
Right, a god. So, verse 5. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their mind about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of his best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so much that he pursued the Israelites, who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi Hahiroth, opposite Baal Zephon. So now, Pharaoh's heart has been hardened by God. When we watch the Exodus Bible Project thing, they make a big emphasis of that. That at first, through the first 5 plagues, Pharaoh is hardening his own heart, right? Because every time he says, "Okay, when the plague happens, let him go," and when the plague ends, he hardens his heart. He has so set himself against God. He has such hatred for the Lord. He's hardening his own heart. But after that, it says that God begins to harden Pharaoh's heart. In other words, what God is doing is God is using now Pharaoh and his hatred for God and for God's people. He's using Pharaoh for his own tool, to be his own instrument, to show God's glory to everybody. That he truly is a God who stands on the side of his people. And nothing will stand against them because of him. Okay? All right. Verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were Egyptians marching after them, and they were terrified, and they cried out to the Lord. So there's 2 ways to live life. You can live life with the Lord by sight or by faith. When you live by sight, what are you depending upon?
Yourself.
Yourself, and what else?
Your senses.
Your senses, the visual realities that are around you. So for them at this moment, by sight, what's their visual reality?
You're being chased.
They're being chased and tracked down by what?
The enemy.
By the enemy. And what kind of enemy?
Wicked.
Wicked and evil and more powerful than they are. I mean, this is Pharaoh,
Soldiers.
king of Egypt. Trained soldiers, chariots, his whole army, right? This is no just small little band of whatever, raiders. This is a professional army, right? Led by probably the most powerful professional army of the day, of the age. And they're pursuing them now, and they're chasing after them. So they look up by sight, and their reaction? Scared. Yeah, they're terrified. And they cry out to the Lord. By sight, everything is against them. Verse 11, they said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert."
Boy, the story changes.
Right? Yeah. So, by sight. What else? But what else of it they had by sight? So far, what has God done for them by sight?
Well, he sent all the plagues.
He sent the plagues. They saw God doing all these plagues, right? The Passover plague, the striking of the firstborn of every male in Egypt, except for theirs, because they were spared by the mercy. And what have they seen every day since they've left the land of Egypt? What have they seen every day and every night? A pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire, which is the visible presence of God on earth for them. They're not living by faith right now at all, because they're seeing the cloud leading them, this fire leading them, and yet when they see a bigger army than they have, what's their reaction?
Scared.
Fear. They're terrified. Even with the visual presence of
I'm going to change my mind here. Maybe I want to go back.
Yeah, then they're going to go back to Egypt. They want to go back to Egypt, right? Would be great for us. We should have stayed there, at least where we're living. Here we're going to die.
And then they were snotty and said, "Weren't there enough graves?"
A little sarcasm there, a little snotty, yeah.
But are they saying that Egypt was mostly flat and sand and it wasn't mountains for them to dig, to have caves for them? Is that what no, they're not saying that.
No. They don't want to die in the desert. Yeah. I don't think it said anything about where they would get buried.
I thought when it would say, "Were there no graves," that it meant caves, really. Because they were really buried into the caves, weren't they?
I think you're reading into it more than you should be right now.
Okay.
See, what they would, in Israel, they would have caves. Not always, though. Not everybody, probably. But you basically, you're buried there until your body decomposes, and then your bones are boxed up.
Because they took Joseph's bones.
Right?
Yeah.
So your bones, you're basically buried in whatever form, and then until you're decomposed, and then your bones are boxed up in an ossuary box, they call it, and then they're stacked in different places.
But Jesus was buried. That was a cave, or did it just?
Yeah, it would have been a cave, right? That's what it says, or hewn out of rock. But he would have only the intent was for him just to be buried there till he decomposed, and then his family would have gathered his bones and put them in an ossuary box. Yeah.
So they were a temporary dwelling.
Right. All right. Verse 14. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid." That's one of how many times?
365.
365 times. Either God, Moses, or angels, or Jesus. Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still.
Moses knew they would never see them again. So he knew that God was going to destroy them.
God has a plan. God had told them, set yourselves up to be sitting ducks, because I want everybody to know, my people, the Egyptian people, to know that I'm the God who fights for my people. And Moses...
ESV says, "And you will only have to be silent. Keep your mouth shut."
Yeah.
Oh, really? You only need to...
Be silent.
Really?
Instead of complaining
Be
and
still.
Quit whining.
whining.
That's interesting. Because this is the same word that's used in a famous psalm.
Yeah.
Which says what, Ms. Bonnie?
Be still and know that I'm God.
Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46, verse 10.
Correct.
Yeah. It's what God says, the only word that God says in that psalm. Everything else is a prayer to God. The only word that God speaks in that psalm is, be still, know that I am God. The reference, I think, in Psalm 46 is, I'm the God who fights for you, right? And what do you need to do? Just be still. Be silent. Some of the image of that is to literally just let your hands just hang limp. It's kind of the image behind it, that you're not going to do nothing.
Anything, right?
Yeah, you're going to do nothing. So your salvation depends upon you how much? Nothing. Nothing at all.
You can't do anything.
This is the God who fights for you, right? This is the God who fights for you. You only need to be still. Who likes that, though? We want to-do lists.
We can handle this.
We got to-do list things to do, right? No, stop trying. Start trusting. Why? Because God says, I'm going to fight for you. The battle belongs to him. The battle belongs to him. All right, verse 15. Let's see what happens. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all of his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. So this intent is not just to save his people and fight for them, but his intent goes beyond that.
It's a display
Of what?
his power.
Yeah,
And
does
his
it say his power?
His loyalty to his people.
His loyalty to his people, and it says gain glory. He's going to show his glory.
And I will gain glory. Yeah.
And it's that glory is his presence. That is the presence of God. The God who fights for his people, but it's through his presence. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was going to say, would increase their faith. You know,
His own people, yeah.
They would see it, and they would actually see it. So.
And it would be a display to all the world
Right.
of his glory. That he's going to be the steadfast God who stands by his people and will not abandon them nor forsake them for any reason. They might forsake him and abandon him, and they do, but he won't forsake them or abandon them. He's going to gain that glory, that honor, through the destruction of the Egyptians who have been set against him. This is not just any ordinary thing. This is Pharaoh who has set himself against God, who says, I'm greater than the Lord. I'm greater than the Lord. God doesn't take too kindly to those things, right? He'll be patient, but only so long. So Moses, what does Moses have to do?
To raise his staff over the...
Yep, and stretch your hand over the sea to divide the waters.
Did Pharaoh didn't go along with the armies?
Well, let's read.
Okay.
Pharaoh's with them, but we don't know how far he goes.
Okay.
Let's see. All right, well, let's just keep looking. All right, verse 19. Then the angel of God...
Jesus.
You are right. This is that angel again, right? That messenger of God. This is no ordinary angel, no ordinary messenger.
It doesn't say then an angel.
Right, it says the.
It's the.
So this is Jesus, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army. So the angel is the pillar of the cloud. The angel is the pillar of fire, right? Jesus takes lots of different forms. This angel of God who had been traveling in front of Israel's army withdrew and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. So now it's behind them. So God not only leads them, now God has their what? God has their back. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to the one side and light to the other. So neither went near the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. Now, how much is a wall of water? We don't know. Yeah,
I think it's pretty high.
could be. We don't know. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, strong east wind, so that visualizes just one side.
Yeah.
But God is going,
Yeah.
so it's just the wind.
Right. It's more than just that. Yeah. Verse 23. The Israelites pursued them, and all of Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed him into the sea. Now, during the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. Okay. So now it's not just the army's overwhelmed. God's intervening by actually making them be confused, right? He made the wheels of their chariots come off so that they had difficult driving, and the Egyptians said, "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." So now they've realized they're battling against something bigger than just a ragtag group of former slaves and now refugees. They're battling against what?
God.
The Lord, against God himself. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and the chariots and their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and the horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites in the sea. Not one of them survived. What does that mean? Not one of them survived.
They all drowned.
They all drowned, which is, yeah. And so that when a professional army is coming down upon you, that's kind of like death for you, right? What has God just done against death for them? He destroyed death,
Yeah.
didn't he? He destroyed their certain destruction, their death. He destroyed it. And how did he destroy it? Drowning him in the waters. Are you picking up on something that might get repeated in our lives?
Baptism,
Bingo. Why do you say baptism, John?
because that's where the Holy Spirit is entering you,
Yeah.
taking over, or
And it's
hopefully taking over your
with the washing of
sin.
water.
Water.
God used water. In the simple means of water washing over your head, death is destroyed in you. We'll hear it again on Saturday at Natalie's funeral. Right?
Mhm.
By baptism, you were joined to Jesus' death, and the old man died. The old man was destroyed. Death was destroyed in your baptism. Because you were crucified with Christ. Your sins, your death was already happened. So Christians would call your baptism day your your tomb. That's where you get buried. Because your death is destroyed. Your baptismal death. It's your coffin. But it's also your womb. So how did the early Christians convey that image of the drowning of the old man and the coming forth and the resurrection of the new man? Baptisms were immersions. They were immersions. When they moved from house churches to their own buildings, they would build a baptistery building separate from the actual sanctuary. It would be a pool, yeah. And it would be the Easter Eve was when they would baptize on Easter Eve. After a preparation time, the baptismal candidates on Easter Eve, the Saturday before Easter morning, would go into the baptisteries and they would strip down naked and they would go into the pool and be immersed. And so the immersion was their drowning, right? Their death. But then they would be raised up out of the waters and in new life, and then they would come out of the waters. They put white robes on them, lead them into the sanctuary where they would have a banquet for them of milk and honey and pomegranates, because they just entered into what? A land flowing with, which was called the Promised Land. And then they would celebrate their first communion to them. So it became a very experiential way of their own baptismal exodus. That God's fighting for them still. And with water destroying their death, destroying their enemies, sin and death and the devil. Yeah, and so that's what God is doing here. Through the waters, he's destroyed death. Not one of them survived. Now, I don't think Pharaoh was part of that crew. It's his armies. He's probably there, but he's not leading them. His generals are leading them and stuff. So is Pharaoh one of them? Probably not.
He's maybe watching it though.
I would say he's watching it, seeing it all, and probably going, oh. In the movie The Ten Commandments, he didn't go through. He watched it.
I think they would have mentioned it.
I think so too. All right, so the last part of the verse 29. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground. And I got a little note here in my Bible. We've gone through that too. We've gone through that too. Because that's our baptismal event. That's our destroying of our enemies, isn't our baptisms. But the Israelites went through the sea on the dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. And today, if you would ask Orthodox Jews, how many of the people walked through the waters of the Red Sea on dry ground? We all have. We all have. They would claim this as their salvation story too. We all have gone through it. That day, the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the great power that the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. So now they put their trust. They've lived by sight. Now they're going to live by faith. By trusting in this God who stood by them, who fought for them, defeated their enemies for them, and now they will put their trust in him.
For a while.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
They'll backslide and grumble and mutter and murmur. And not that we would ever do that, right? We have put our trust in the Lord because of our baptismal promise, right? God has taken us through death into life through the baptism. We've passed through that Red Sea as well. And we only live by faith and never by sight. So we would never.
Well, it said they wandered in the wilderness 40 years. So
They did.
You're moving generation to generation because that first generation all would have passed away, so that it's their kids and grandkids that have to only believe because they didn't see it.
They didn't see it themselves. They could only believe, right? Yep.
Good point. I didn't think of that.
And that's why they would have to keep telling the story so that they would know that that's the God who fights for us. And that's what the whole Passover celebration was intended for. Yeah. All right. So that is chapter 14. Chapter 15 is going to be our Easter text, the Song of Miriam and Moses at the sea, which is recapping the whole thing that we just read in chapter 14, except for it's doing it in a song about how God fights the enemy for you and brings salvation. And I think it's the first time the word salvation is used in the Bible.
I have that written in my Bible. Unless I've done it with some other pastor, I don't know, if it's Pastor Pope or whatever. And I
What's
wrote
that?
it down. It says the first time in the Bible that it's salvation.
It was on the videos that I've shown a few times too.
Mm.
They make mention of that. Yep. All right. Any more questions on chapter 14? Anything in there that?
I'm surprised the archaeologists haven't found any weapons of metal that, the wood and stuff would have all decayed over the years, bodies, but, metal, any
Yeah.
metal that in the
I don't know of anything either, John. It's hard to
Unless they didn't use much metal
Locate.
back then.
yeah, who knows? I mean, they probably do know. I don't know myself.
Google it.
It's worth a Google.
I would show just exactly, because like you said, they still don't know exact spot.
No, oh,
They
that's
can
right,
only have ideas, but.
yeah.
And the Sea of Reeds is sometimes what it's called too, instead of the Red Sea. So
But God could have got rid of all the evidence too, we don't.
yeah, I don't think God's too concerned about the evidence.
Actually,
But when you do find it, it is kind of neat
Oh, it
to
is,
have historical references
Yeah.
backing up what we.
The Dead Sea Scrolls, that was,
Yeah, those
Amazing.
big finds. So.
I think we all grew up watching the Ten Commandments,
Mhm.
and how they were able to do that, I mean, it's,
with,
you never forget it.
Right.
Yeah.
Anybody else on this story? Anything muttering through your brain or your mind, questions or thoughts that you
Hasn't there
have?
also been, I mean, like, they've tried to, everybody tries to reason, how did this happen?
Yeah. I remember it was a History Channel or Discovery, one of them that they did some research on this and the time frames, and there's theories of maybe an earthquake that did something at the time to
Yeah.
divide the waters
Like
and create floods.
Like a tsunami kind of
Yeah.
situation.
Right.
Where the winds and everything was just right, and I think then they kind of thought they knew about where that might have been based on those
Yeah.
arguments.
Yeah.
Well, God would use human nature to do these things.
Sure,
Absolutely.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, if demons can control the wind and the devil has control over some elements of nature, which he does, how much more does God, right? All right. Anything else?
This reminds me of the little Sunday school song, How Did Moses Cross the Red Sea?
Really? I never heard that one.
How did Moses get God blew with his wind, puff, 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 puff.
So at camp we sang this song called Pharaoh, Pharaoh, but it was to the Pharaoh, Pharaoh, oh baby, let my people go. Oof-da. Yeah, sure, you betcha. There was just the other day of a burning bush. I can't remember all the words.
This is a
Elizabeth was
Wisconsin song.
It is. Camp Elizabeth song.
Oh, it's a UP
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Midwest, yeah.
So that so the tune is Louie Louie, right? The old rock song Louie Louie. They sing it Pharaoh Pharaoh, and Moses lifted his hands, and the people, did the dead man's float. All the Pharaoh's armies followed too, and did the dead man's float. And, I sang that one so many times. I can't. I'm not great at remembering words of songs, as my wife always tells me. So she hears them once and she remembers them all.
On the movie Ten Commandments, they made big emphasis on Pharaoh's son being the firstborn killed also.
Mhm.
That was the heir to his
Right.
power and everything. I mean, that's what really incensed them.
Right. They did. Ben Kingsley played Moses in a TNT version of the story many years, and they portrayed it. I don't know how they portrayed the crossing of the Red Sea in that. I don't remember. I've seen bits of it, but I don't know how they portrayed it in there because they scaled everything back. It was a small group. It wasn't 1 million people, and it was a small group of refugees, and it was pretty good. It was pretty good. It wasn't on the grand scale of the Ten Commandments, though, with Charles Heston.
Well, later on, then the people of Israel did crossing the Jordan, or wasn't it some river?
They
where
did.
The waters were parted
Yep.
as well.
When they entered the same thing, when they entered the Promised Land, Joshua 3. You were right. All right, we all, any other questions or thoughts? So the big verse is verse 14. That's the big verse there. Right. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still. And when you are still, you're not to do anything but do what?
Be there.
Be there, and the T word.
Trust.
Trust. Trust. Trusting in faith. Faith is believing in what you cannot see. Right. So whenever every evidence says it's against you, God would say, but trust, I am still for you. Yeah, I am still for you. I'm not against you. And I'm bigger than whatever is against you. So live by faith. Live by that trust. Which is not easy to do. Okay. Let's skip over to the New Testament reading. Romans chapter 1. So this letter to the Romans, Paul has not ever been to Rome that we know of before this letter. It's a letter that he's writing kind of introduce himself, and he wants to get there. He wants to be with them. Part of it is, and I like this, we think that it's a letter that he's writing to prepare for his visit, because he wants to gain their support. And he wants to gain their support because he's got one big missionary goal left. He wants to go to Spain. He wants to take the gospel to Gaul, which is what today we call Spain. And he kind of wants them to be his mission supporters, right? His backers for that journey. And so he's writing this letter, kind of getting them ready to introduce himself to them. Now he'll eventually get there, but he will never do the journey because he's going there and they'll put him on trial and he'll die there. All right, so verse 16. I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes, first the Jew, then the Gentile. In the gospel, a righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. 2 little verses. So what is he not ashamed of?
Gospel.
Yeah, the gospel. Why is he not ashamed of it?
It's the power of God for the salvation of everyone.
It's the power of God. You know what the word for power is in Greek? Dynamis. Dynamis. But what word in our English language might describe power that sounds like dynamis, or might come from dynamis? It's a very powerful substance that when it was discovered, exactly, dynamite, right? TNT, dynamite. I can't never remember the guy who invented it or came up with it, but that kind of was one of the major changes, right? This bang from a little substance, you could create this power. That's what he chose the word dynamite because he knew dynamis meant power, and he had just invented this thing, power of dynamite. But the real dynamite in Romans is the gospel. What's the gospel? Yeah, yes, but more than that.
The good news of God.
Good news. Gospel is good news, yeah. It is this proclamation of good news. That's the power of God. And the good news is you've got 10 rules to follow, and if you follow them, what? You'll be saved. Is that the gospel? No. That's what you got to do. But that is what?
That's the law.
That's the law. That's what Paul is going to be countering. People think in order to be saved, I gotta, be a good person, be
Check
good
off.
life, things checked off, get the list taken care of. Martin Luther thought that. In fact, verse 17 is the verse that opened his eyes to the freedom that he had never seen in his life. Because Luther doesn't see a Bible till he's 20 years old. Did you know that? He doesn't see a Bible till he's 20 years old. He's been studying since he was 4, preparing to be a lawyer, but never seen a Bible. Even when he enters the monastery, he doesn't see a Bible for a long time. And then he gets sent to Wittenberg University in 1512, to be a preacher and a teacher at this new university, campus pastor. And for the first time, he's going to actually start reading the Bible, because he's going to have to preach and lecture on it. And one of the first books that he begins to teach on is the book of Romans. And everything in his language, everything that he had read about the Bible or started reading the Bible, was in Latin. But he discovers the Bible was not written in the Latin language. The Latin is translation from a guy by the name of Jerome in the 5th century. The Bible was written in what language? Hebrew and Greek. The New Testament in Greek. You did. Hebrew, and he begins to learn those languages from his colleague Philip Melanchthon, who is a linguist, and he knows those languages, the ancient languages. And Philip Melanchthon teaches him. So Luther begins to study and read the Bible in its original languages. And it's now in the words running through the Bible, tracing these words, is where the light finally goes on for him. And he sees there's a way out of this prison that he has found himself in. Where, can I be freed from sin? Nope. Is there a day of judgment? Yep. Is God indifferent to sin? Does God just go, oh, well, no big deal? Nope. Must I be damned? Yeah. I got to be damned. That was the 4 walls of his prison. And he saw no way out until verse 17. Look at verse 17. For in the gospel, in the good news, there is a righteousness from God being revealed, a righteousness that is by faith, not by what you do. This righteousness from God is a gift, and it's by faith. Just as it's written, and then Paul is quoting Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4, the prophet Habakkuk, the righteous will live by faith.
There must have been a lot of controversy at that time about the people who had done the translation of the Bible, because you really have to put a lot of trust. If you're reading one of their translations of the Bible, even us, you have to have a lot of faith that they were accurately translating things.
Yeah.
And so there had to be, more so then than now, there had to be a lot of people not agreeing with
Well,
what they were
the Catholic Church only official version was the Latin. It was
Yeah.
called the Vulgate, and that was the only one that you were supposed to read.
Mhm.
That's why they put to death John Wycliffe. Wycliffe was an Englishman who translated the Bible into English, and was executed for that.
And the congregation, the people, didn't necessarily, like we all have our Bibles, but
They
Luther didn't have a Bible.
He did not have. That's why he didn't see a Bible till he's 20, right? Because the
Yeah.
Bibles were pretty rare because they were all hand copied, right? And so, yeah, they were rare documents. So Luther then does the unthinkable, and he translates the New Testament in 100 days from Greek into German. And that's that was an unthinkable thing at this time. And he was already branded a heretic, so why not go full scale and do the translation too? And it became the standard teaching of all German language was Luther's translation of the New Testament. That's how Germans taught for 400 years. How children teach. They used his translation of German of the Bible. That's their standard reading book for teaching people to read. Yeah. So Luther broke a lot of rules. But he goes down back to verse 4, or Habakkuk verse 4, the righteous, right? Those who are right with God. His whole way of thinking and teaching and believing had always been, you get right with God by doing the right things. God will give you grace, right? God infuses you with his grace, but the grace is meant to make you be a better person so that you'll do better things. And the more better things you do, the more then God will love you. But now he's reading, that's not what Romans taught at all. The righteous, those who are right with God, live by what? By faith. And faith in the God who is going to be for you and not against you. And that's not going to be by works, so that nobody will boast, but it's going to be through the blood of Jesus and your faith in him. So if you don't got to do anything, just trust. Now, we can make that grace be very cheap, though, right? So what should I say? I could keep on sinning so that God keeps on forgiving? No, by no means. Paul will tell people. Right? By no means. You're going to walk in the newness of life if you've been baptized into Jesus. All right. So that verse becomes a major verse in the movement of the Reformation. And Luther becomes a media star. He becomes the first guy who goes viral. Because what was invented in 1436 that helped Luther go viral? The printing press, which changed everything. Because until then, everything had to be, if you wrote a document, the only way it could be read is by somebody having that document or somebody copying it. Well, who's going to recopy people's documents? Not very many, right? Recopy the Bible, yeah, but doing that by a scribe takes forever. And the scrolls were kept and maintained, and some were destroyed, and some decayed. But now that you got the printing press, this modern invention, Luther took advantage of it. And what else got invented in 1516? You know, was the very first thing in 1516 was the very first postal service that was established in Europe, so that documents could be transported by paying somebody to do it for you. And because of all those two things, Luther went viral. He was the media star of the first, generation of that time frame, of the transition from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance, to the Age of Enlightenment.
The light.
John.
If you're going to be a teacher, I could see with Martin Luther and this guy that did it. If you want to talk to people, you want them to understand what you're telling them.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, Luther translated Bible into the German language. He created a German Mass. They had the Latin Mass, but created his own German Mass.
So did they start schools for the young ones at that time? When did
I don't know. Faith would have all been taught in the home.
If Catherine might have had a school.
No, she taught her own kids.
There were a lot of them.
Yeah. And the renters, they would have boarders in their house as well.
Yeah.
They would have students going to the university that would board in their house. Yeah. No,
But I wondered about.
They had grammar schools. Catechism was for the home.
Okay, but
The small catechism was written for parents to teach their kids in the home the faith.
when did he do that?
1530, or the catechism was somewhere around 1523, 24.
Mm-hmm.
So, but he wrote that as this is how you should teach your family. As when you read the very first line in the catechism, as the head of the household shall teach his family.
Yeah.
Every part starts with that. And so it was meant to be a prayer book to teach the faith in the home. They didn't have parochial schools yet.
Not formal.
The grammar schools were, not everybody went to school. Right?
Oh, that's true.
In that age. Luther was very lucky. His father was and that's part of the age of the whole history of it. They're transitioning from peasants working for the landlords, right, for the dukes and everybody owned the land, to Luther's father was a miner and then owned his own business eventually, which allowed him to send his son to school. And so you're starting to develop what we would call a middle class, right around that time of the late 1400s. So there's economic change. It was just ripe for a Reformation.
Do you know if Luther had any siblings?
I don't. He probably did. I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming he did. I don't know for sure though. I mean, I think he did. Because they usually had bigger families.
Yeah.
But he started grammar school at 4 years old in Latin. He started grammar school at 4 years old.
Don't use a band.
He took the AP classes. All right. Anything else on our little Romans passage? All right. Then we'll stand for the gospel. Matthew 11. It's a short one. They're short readings because it's going to take me a while to read Exodus 14. I'll probably have to take a break and get a drink of water or something. Verses.
Just have your glass sitting up there.
There you go. Chapter 11. Verse 25. At that time Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this was your good pleasure. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Pretty familiar words. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Kind of sounds like the Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still. Bring your weakness to God. Bring your sins to God. Let God carry them, because you can't. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me. The yoke is easy and his burden is light. He does the work. What do? Nada. Nothing. You're still. Know that God will fight for you.
It's interesting, right at the beginning. That Jesus declared, he talked to his Father. Thank for hiding these things from the wise and for revealing it to children. Children would just take it at face value and trust it.
Exactly.
But the wise would want to try and
Figure it out.
figure it out.
Yeah. And so Jesus will say, when the disciples try to keep the little kids away from him, remember Jesus gets ticked off, and he says, let the little children come to me, for I tell you, unless you are like a child, you will never enter the kingdom of God. So what is it all that children can do?
Listen and believe.
Listen and believe and have trust. Yeah. I mean, when, and psychology has verified that, by the way. Abraham Maslow did a study of human development, and in his pyramid of human development, he says the very first thing that a child learns is trust or mistrust. The very first thing a child learns is trust. And what can a little baby do? Nothing. But trust. So when baby is got a full diaper, baby cries. When baby cries, what happens? Mommy or daddy comes, changes the diaper, and baby realizes, oh, this person will take care of me. If I'm hungry, baby cries. What does mommy do? Mommy feeds him, takes care of him. Baby's afraid, he cries. What does baby do? Nothing. Mommy or daddy takes care of him, and the baby learns to trust. So Jesus says, be very baby-like. In trust, not in action. In trust. Don't be childish in your actions, just in your trust. Childlike. So we are the weak and the weary. But none of us likes to be considered that, do we? We're strong and capable. Not in terms of salvation. So stop trying, start trusting. God will fight for you today. You only need to be still. All right, we're going to close with that. I got some little ones coming in a few minutes.